Vesuvius was erupting. While people fled, the commander of Rome's fleet sailed toward it. His nephew says warships were ordered out. Then the account never mentions them again. We know why Pliny the Elder left. We know what stopped the vessel carrying him, but we do not know how many ships actually sailed, where the others went, or whom they saved. This is the story of a Roman commander who chose the direction everyone else was fleeing from, and of the blank space that followed him into the bay. In AD 79, Pliny the Elder was stationed at Misenum on the western edge of the Bay of Naples. He was there in command of Rome's fleet. That is why Admiral works as a modern shorthand, even if it is not a word-for-word Roman title. He was also the author of the Natural History, a man who tried to gather the known world into books. On the day of the eruption, he had bathed, eaten, and returned to his work when his sister pointed out an unusual cloud. It rose on a long trunk and spread into branches. From across the bay, it looked like a pine tree. Pliny wanted a better view. He called for his shoes, climbed to a vantage point, and ordered a light Liburnian vessel made ready. He even offered his nephew a place aboard. The younger Pliny chose to stay behind and finish a writing exercise. At this point, there was no rescue mission. There was a question in the sky, and Pliny intended to get closer to it. He observed carefully, but he did not possess modern volcanology. The cloud was still something to investigate, not yet the outline of a catastrophe. As Pliny was leaving, a message arrived from a woman named Rectina. Her villa lay near the mountain. The danger had cut off escape by land, and according to the letter, the only way out was by sea. She begged him to take her away. The next sentence is brief. Pliny changed his plan. What had begun as an expedition driven by curiosity became an attempt to bring help. His nephew says that Pliny ordered quadriremes out, boarded himself, and set off to aid more people than Rectina alone. The plural matters. Quadriremes were substantial naval vessels, not the light boat first prepared for a private investigation. Pliny was using the authority and equipment available to a fleet commander, but the letter gives no number. It does not tell us which ships were ready, how many crews embarked, or whether every vessel ordered out actually left the base. It also never tells us what happened to Rectinae. The letter records the order in detail, the ships, the boarding, the departure. It never records who, if anyone, they reached. Pliny now hurried toward a coast from which other people were trying to escape. The nearer the letter takes him, the more physical the danger becomes. Ash fell darker and thicker, then came pieces of pumice, followed by stones blackened, burned, and broken by the heat. The sea itself was changing. The water grew shallow. Debris from the mountain blocked the shore. Every new detail reduced the choices available to the crews. A ship could keep moving, but it still needed water deep enough to float and a shore open enough to approach. The disaster was closing the last part of the journey. This was no longer a simple question of whether a commander was brave enough to keep going. The coastline was becoming difficult to approach, and the route to anyone waiting there was closing. The helmsman urged Pliny to turn back. In his nephew's telling, Pliny answered with the line that would outlive him: "Fortune favors the brave." Then he gave a new order: make for Pomponianus. Pomponianus was at Stabiae, farther along the curving bay. Pliny's exact route before that turn cannot be recovered from the letter. What it does tell us is that the approach to the threatened shore had become hazardous, and that Stabiae was the next named destination. The wind that frustrated one escape now helped another arrival. It carried Pliny across the water toward Pomponianus. Behind him, or perhaps beside him, were the other ships mentioned in that single sentence. The ancient account does not say. From this point, the surviving evidence follows one man's path. Pliny the Younger was not aboard. He had remained at Misenum. He later told Tacitus that his account combined what he saw with what he heard while memories were still fresh. The surviving letter is neither a ship's log nor a view from nowhere. It is a shaped account written years later for a specific purpose, to help Tacitus place his uncle's death in history. At the center of the problem are 4 Latin words: deducit quadriremes, ascendit ips. The usual reading is that Pliny ordered quadriremes launched and embarked himself. One modern reconstruction follows that plural into a coordinated naval operation. Another reading argues that the fleet may not have sailed together at all, and that Pliny continued in a single Liburnian vessel. No second ancient logbook settles the argument. The letter never returns to the other quadriremes. It does not say that they sank. It does not say that they turned back. It does not say that they reached another part of the coast. The silence is not a lost ending we can reconstruct. It is the point past which this letter simply stops following the ships. At Stabiae, Pliny found Pomponianus waiting. His ships were already loaded, but a contrary wind held them in place. The same wind that had carried Pliny in now prevented Pomponianus from leaving. Pliny embraced the frightened man. Then, according to his nephew, he tried to make calm visible. He bathed, he ate, he appeared relaxed. Outside, flames shone against the darkness around Vesuvius. Pliny told the people with him that abandoned farmhouses were burning. Whether he believed that explanation or simply wanted to steady the room, the letter presents it as reassurance. He even slept. His snoring could be heard outside the door, but ash and stone were piling up in the courtyard. If he stayed inside much longer, the way out might be sealed. When Pliny rejoined the others, the buildings were shaking so violently that they seemed to slide from their foundations. They had to choose between 2 bad options: remain under roofs that might collapse, or step outside beneath falling debris. The letter calls Pliny's choice rational. Others, it says, simply chose the danger they feared less. Nobody there had a safe plan. They were comparing a shaking roof with a sky that was dropping stone. They chose the open air and tied pillows over their heads. Elsewhere it was morning. At Stabiae, the darkness was thicker than night. People carried torches down toward the shore to see whether the sea would finally let them leave. It would not. Pliny rested beneath a sail and asked for cold water. The fleet commander had reached a harbor, but the harbor had become a trap. Then came the smell of sulfur and the glow of approaching fire. Others fled. Pliny tried to stand with the help of 2 enslaved attendants and immediately collapsed. When daylight returned, his body was found clothed and apparently uninjured. To his nephew, he looked more asleep than dead. The younger Pliny believed that dust-laden air had blocked his uncle's breathing, made worse by an existing weakness. Suetonius, another Roman writer, also blamed dust and ash, but preserved a very different rumor that Pliny had asked a slave to end his suffering. Centuries later, physicians have proposed respiratory failure, an asthma-like attack, a cardiac event, and other explanations. An apparently uninjured body cannot tell us whether lungs, heart, heat, or another cause failed first. The smell of sulfur identifies part of the environment, not a toxic dose measured at the scene. None can be confirmed. We have a description of a collapse, not a diagnosis. The exact cause of Pliny's death is unknown. So what can we finally say about the rescue? There is no surviving passenger list, no report of how many people these ships reached, and no account of where the other quadriremes went. Rectina's fate remains unknown. We cannot call the mission a success, and we cannot prove that it failed. We should not confuse that silence with the fate of everyone around Vesuvius. Many people escaped the destroyed communities by different routes. Recent research has traced survivors from Pompeii and Herculaneum in 12 later communities. That work reveals lives rebuilt after the eruption. It does not prove that Pliny's fleet carried them away. Even the familiar date carries a warning. The eruption happened in AD 79. The traditional date of August 24th remains disputed, with several lines of evidence pointing instead to autumn. and the Romans were not simply blind to what they saw. Pliny's nephew described the rising cloud, falling ash, receding shore, and overwhelming darkness with remarkable precision. His account later gave this kind of eruption its name, Plinian, but observation is not control. Pliny responded with the tools he understood: ships, authority, careful attention, and his own presence. He sailed toward people who had asked for help, into conditions no Roman commander could command. Giving the voyage a record-setting label would make the evidence sound more certain than it is. The real story does not need one. Pliny sailed toward the eruption and died at Stabiae. His decision survives clearly. The scale and result of the mission do not. If his nephew had never written to Tacitus, how much of this voyage would have survived at all? If you want more stories built from what the sources say and what they leave unanswered, subscribe to Atlas of Ages.